The air in the ICU was a sterile hum, a symphony of quiet beeps and the gentle hiss of ventilators. It was a sound Anya Sharma had learned to parse, to translate into a language of life and death. She moved between the beds with an economy of motion that belied her status as the newest nurse on the floor, checking IV drips, adjusting pillows, making notes on digital charts with swift, precise taps of her finger. Her face, framed by dark hair pulled back into a severe bun, was a mask of professional calm. Unreadable, detached. It was a necessary armor in a place where emotions were a liability. She was competent, efficient, and utterly invisible, just the way she wanted it. Nurse Sharma. The voice was a low growl of condescension, sharp enough to cut through the ambient noise. Dr. Marcus Cross, chief of neurosurgery. He stood with his arms crossed, a god in blue scrubs surveying his temporary kingdom of the nearly departed. His eyes, pale and dismissive, swept over her. "Finish your rounds. The Thorne family is arriving." He didn't wait for a reply. He simply stated a fact and expected compliance, turning his attention to the resident trailing in his wake like a nervous shadow. Anya's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of rebellion behind the placid mask. She hated that tone, the casual dismissal, the assumption that her role was simply to follow orders, to be a pair of hands and nothing more. She had faced down men who held scalpels with far more authority and far less arrogance. But that was another life, a life she had buried under 6 feet of sterile procedure and professional anonymity. Here, she was just Nurse Sharma, the young, new, inexperienced in their eyes. She finished charting on her current patient and moved toward the private room at the end of the hall. Room 308, the Admiral's room, Admiral Thomas Thorne, a name that had been whispered in reverent, then tragic, tones for 3 long weeks. A national hero, felled not by enemy fire, but by a slick patch of ice on a Washington, D.C. sidewalk. A simple fall, a catastrophic subdural hematoma. They had operated. Cross himself had led the team, but the Admiral never woke up. Now, the official diagnosis was in. Brain death. The final irrevocable stamp on a decorated life. The family had been told to come say goodbye. Anya paused at the doorway, her gaze falling on the man in the bed. He was a ghost tangled in wires and tubes, his once commanding presence reduced to the rhythmic rise and fall of a machine-driven chest. The monitors above him blinked with steady, meaningless green lines. Life, but not. She felt a familiar, bitter pang. It was the cold calculus of her former world, the triage of survival. Some you saved, some you could not. But this felt different. It felt wrong, too simple, too neat. She pushed the thought away. It was not her place. Her place was to ensure the patient's comfort, to offer quiet support to the grieving family, and to stay out of Dr. Cross's way. The Thorne family arrived. A stoic woman who had to be his wife, her grief a tightly controlled mask that mirrored Anya's own. And a man in his late 30s, his military bearing unmistakable even in civilian clothes. The son. His jaw was granite, his eyes holding a storm of pain. Behind them, led by a hospital administrator and a handler in a tactical vest, was the final visitor. A Belgian Malinois, sleek and alert, its intelligent eyes taking in everything. Odin, the Admiral's service dog, a special request approved as a final courtesy. A murmur went through the nursing station. It was unusual, a break in the sterile protocol. Anya watched from the periphery, finishing her charting at a small computer alcove down the hall. She preferred to observe, to remain part of the background. The dog's handler, a serious-looking man from a veteran support organization, unclipped the leash just inside the ICU's main doors. "Go find him, boy," the handler said softly. "Go see the Admiral." The dog, Odin, took a step. His ears swiveled, parsing the cacophony of hospital sounds. He sniffed the air. The family watched, holding its collective breath, expecting the dog to bound toward the Admiral's room. A final, loyal reunion. But Odin did not move toward room 308. He completely ignored the Admiral's wife and son. He ignored the handler's quiet command. His head turned, slowly, deliberately, away from the tragic scene everyone was focused on. His dark, intense gaze swept past the other nurses, past the residents, past the blinking equipment. And then it stopped. It locked onto the figure in the corner, the quiet, unassuming nurse trying to be invisible. Odin locked onto Anya. Anya felt the weight of the dog's stare like a physical touch. A current of electricity shot up her spine. It was impossible. She froze, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The dog took a step, then another. With a purpose that silenced the entire unit, the Belgian Malinois walked directly across the polished floor. Not to his master, not to the grieving family, straight to her. He stopped a foot from her chair, his body tense with recognition. He sat, and he waited. A low whine escaped his throat, a sound of profound, questioning familiarity. He nudged her hand with his wet nose, a cold, startling touch that shattered her carefully constructed walls. Every eye in the ICU was now on her, on the new nurse and the hero dog who had inexplicably chosen her. Dr. Cross, who had been speaking in hushed tones with the family, turned, his face a mask of irritation. "What is the meaning of this? Handler, get your animal under control." The handler looked baffled. I don't understand. He's never done this." The Admiral's son, the colonel, stepped forward, his eyes narrowed, studying Anya with an intensity that made her skin crawl. He was not looking at a nurse. He was assessing a threat, or an anomaly. "He knows you," the colonel stated. It was not a question. Anya could not speak. Her throat was tight, her heart hammering against her ribs. The past was a tidal wave, and this dog was the first crack in the dam. She could feel the water starting to pour through. Odin whined again, more insistent this time, and nudged her hand harder, pushing it off the desk. Then he turned his head and looked pointedly, meaningfully, toward room 308. He looked back at Anya. The message was clear. Him. Go to him. Something is wrong. In that moment, the carefully built persona of Nurse Sharma crumbled into dust, and the ghost she had tried to bury stood up. The silence in the ICU was absolute. Every beep and whir of the machines seemed to fade into a dull background roar. All that existed was the pressure of the dog's nose against her skin and the weight of 24 pairs of eyes. Anya slowly lowered her hand, her gaze locked with the Belgian Malinois. In the depths of those intelligent brown eyes, she saw it. A flicker of memory, dust, the smell of cordite and antiseptic, the frantic rhythmic beat of a chopper's blades, Kandahar. The dog, Odin, had been there, a younger, leaner version of the animal before her, but the same soul. He had been part of a K-9 unit attached to the visiting Admiral's security detail, and she had been there too. "Ma'am?" The Admiral's son, Colonel Thorne, took another step closer. His voice was low, controlled, but laced with an urgent curiosity. "The dog knows you." "Why?" Anya swallowed, forcing words past the lump of ice in her throat. "We've met." It was an absurd understatement. Dr. Cross scoffed, his patience finally snapping. "This is a hospital, not a kennel club reunion. Nurse, if you're a distraction to the animal, please remove yourself. Handler, take the dog to the patient's room or take him out." But Odin did not move. He let out a short, sharp bark, a sound of pure command. He looked at Anya. He looked at the Admiral's room. He nudged her again, harder. Anya felt a switch flip in her mind. The fog of her carefully maintained anonymity burned away, replaced by a clarity so sharp it hurt. The dog wasn't just remembering her. He was trying to tell her something. Animals, especially trained ones like Odin, lived in a world of sensory input far beyond human perception. Scent, pheromones, the subtle chemical changes of a body in distress. He smelled something wrong, something the machines and the doctors had missed. She stood up. The movement was fluid, decisive. The hesitant uncertainty of Nurse Sharma was gone. "I need to see the patient," she said. Cross's face darkened with fury. "You have seen the patient, nurse. You've been on this floor for 2 weeks. The diagnosis is confirmed. He is brain dead. The family is here to say goodbye. Do not interfere." "The dog thinks you're wrong," Anya said, her voice flat and even. A wave of shocked whispers rippled through the staff. "The dog?" Cross repeated, his voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. "Are you a veterinarian now, Sharma? Or have you been watching too many children's movies? We have run every test, multiple EEGs showing no cortical activity, a cerebral blood flow study showing no perfusion. He meets every clinical criterion for brain death. It's over. Anya walked past him, Odin trotting at her heel as if they were tethered by an invisible leash. She did not have the authority to do this. She was risking her job, her license, the quiet life she had so painstakingly built. She did not care. A life was on the line. Maybe. She entered room 308. The Admiral's wife gasped, startled. Colonel Thorne followed Anya in, his expression a mixture of suspicion and dawning hope. Anya ignored them all. Her focus narrowed to the man in the bed. Her eyes, trained by years of battlefield triage where seconds meant the difference between a flag-draped coffin and a medevac flight, scanned the scene. The ventilator settings. The IV bags hanging like strange fruit. Saline. That was it. Just maintenance fluids. The patient's skin had a pale, waxy sheen. She reached into the pocket of her scrubs and pulled out a small penlight. "What are you doing?" Cross demanded from the doorway, his voice a low threat. Anya leaned over the Admiral. She gently prized open his right eyelid with her thumb. The pupil was fixed and dilated, just as the chart said. She shone the light into it. No reaction. She did the same for the left eye. Nothing. This was the standard pupillary light reflex test, the first thing any medical student learned. The one Cross and his team had surely performed a dozen times, but Anya wasn't performing the standard test. She held the light on the left pupil, then she swung it rapidly to the right eye, looking for something else entirely. Not a direct reaction, but a consensual one. The swinging flashlight test, a test for a relative afferent pupillary defect, a test for the optic nerve. Basic. Still nothing. But she wasn't done. She placed her thumb firmly on the supraorbital notch, the small groove on the ridge of his eyebrow, right over the supraorbital nerve. She pressed, hard. It was a noxious stimulus, a deep pain trigger designed to elicit a response from even a deeply comatose patient. "Stop it!" Cross barked. "You are desecrating a dying man." Anya ignored him. Her eyes were glued to the Admiral's face. For a second, there was nothing. Then she saw it. A tiny, almost imperceptible flicker, a slight grimace, a minute tightening of the corrugator muscle between his eyebrows. It was a deep brainstem reflex, a signal from the most primitive, protected part of the brain, a part of the brain that should not be functioning if he were truly brain dead. "He's not brain dead," she breathed, the words hanging in the silent room. Cross laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "A muscle fasciculation, post-mortem artifact. I've seen it 100 times. You're seeing what you want to see." Anya straightened up, turning to face the assembled staff in the doorway. Her voice, when she spoke, was no longer the quiet murmur of a nurse. It was steel. It was command. It was the voice of someone who had given orders while covered in the blood of heroes. "I need a portable EEG, a lumbar puncture kit, and a bolt kit. Now." The resident stared at her, mouth agape. The other nurses looked at Cross, then back at Anya, trapped in a shocking breakdown of hospital hierarchy. "A bolt kit?" the resident stammered. "For an intracranial pressure monitor? We can't do that here. That's a surgical procedure." "I am aware," Anya said, her gaze cold. "Get it." Cross stepped fully into the room, his face purple with rage. "I am the chief of neurosurgery in this hospital, and you are a nurse. You will not give orders in my ICU. You are fired, Sharma. Security will escort you out. Your career in medicine is over." Anya met his furious glare without flinching. "Then you'll have 2 deaths on your conscience today, his and mine on your permanent record. That's enough." The voice came from Colonel Thorne. He had been watching Anya, his analytical gaze missing nothing. He had seen the flicker of muscle in his father's face. He had seen the absolute, an unwavering certainty in Anya's eyes. It was a look he recognized. He had seen it on the faces of Special Forces operators right before they breached a door, the look of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "My father is a fighter," the colonel said, his voice ringing with authority. "If there is a 1 in a billion chance, we are taking it. You," he said, pointing a finger not at Cross but at the stunned resident. "Get her what she asked for. Now. That is an order." The resident looked at Cross, who was speechless, his authority utterly usurped by the patient's family. The resident looked at the colonel, a man who radiated command. The resident fled to get the equipment. Cross stood there, shaking with impotent fury. "You are all insane. You're letting a delusional nurse drill a hole in his head based on a dog's hunch and a muscle twitch." "She is not just a nurse," Colonel Thorne said, his eyes still locked on Anya. "Are you?" Anya picked up a sterile wipe from a nearby tray, her movements economical and practiced. She began cleaning a small area on the Admiral's temple. "His intracranial pressure is through the roof," she said, speaking to the colonel but making sure everyone could hear. "It's so high it's causing central herniation, compressing the brainstem and mimicking brain death. It's cutting off cerebral perfusion, which is why the blood flow study was negative. But it's not irreversible, not yet. It's a pressure cooker in there. We have to let the steam out." The resident returned, pushing a crash cart laden with supplies, the lumbar puncture kit. Due to the portable EEG and the sterile tray containing the bolt kit, a hand drill, a hollow point screw, a bolt, and the fiber optic cable to measure the pressure. Anya's hands moved with a speed and precision that was mesmerizing. She slapped the EEG leads onto the Admiral's scalp in a practiced pattern. "Turn it on. Filter out the artifact. I want to see deep delta waves, anything." She prepped the lumbar puncture kit. "I'm not going in the spine. The pressure in his head is too high. A spinal tap would cause his brain to herniate down the brainstem. It would kill him instantly. Whoever suggested that in his initial workup should be fired." A barb aimed directly at Cross. She was going to measure the CSF pressure from the source. She picked up the manual drill from the bolt kit. It was a simple, almost primitive tool. A hand-crank drill designed for emergencies, for the field. The room held its breath. The Admiral's wife was crying softly, her hand over her mouth. Cross watched, his arrogance replaced by a horrified, morbid fascination. This was a nightmare, a complete breakdown of all order and protocol. He was witnessing his career implode. Anya placed the tip of the drill against the Admiral's shaven temple at a precise point just above the zygomatic arch. Coker's point. A landmark every neurosurgeon knew. She looked up, her eyes finding Cross's in the stunned silence. "Watch me," she said. It was not a request. It was a challenge, a promise. And then she began to drill. The sound was sickening. A dry, grinding crunch as the drill bit chewed through skin, then muscle, then bone. It was a sound that belonged on a construction site, not in the sterile sanctity of an intensive care unit. The Admiral's wife let out a small, strangled sob and turned away, burying her face in her son's shoulder. Colonel Thorne stood like a statue, his eyes fixed on Anya's hands, his trust an almost tangible force in the room. Dr. Cross watched, his face pale, a cold sweat beading on his forehead. Every instinct, every year of his meticulous, protocol-driven training screamed that this was butchery, a barbaric, unsanctioned assault. He was witnessing a career-ending, multi-million-dollar lawsuit in real time. But he could not look away, because Anya's hands were steady, impossibly steady. There was no tremor, no hesitation. Her movements were brutally efficient, a dance of practiced violence. She applied pressure, twisted, released, her rhythm perfect. She felt the subtle change in resistance as the bit passed through the outer table of the skull, the softer diploic space, and then the hard inner table. She felt the pop as she breached the dura mater, the tough outer lining of the brain. She stopped instantly. The entire procedure had taken less than 15 seconds. A thin trickle of dark venous blood welled up from the hole, followed immediately by a clear, watery fluid that began to drip, then stream, down the Admiral's temple. Cerebrospinal fluid. "Pressure is critical," Anya stated, her voice a calm anchor in the storm of shock. She did not need a monitor to tell her that. The force with which the CSF was escaping was proof enough. She quickly and expertly threaded the small, hollow bolt into the newly drilled hole, seating it firmly in the skull. Then she fed the delicate fiber-optic pressure catheter through it. "Hook it up," she commanded the resident, who fumbled with the cable, his hands shaking. He connected it to the portable monitor. The screen flickered to life. A number appeared. 65 millimeters of mercury. A collective gasp went through the room. Normal intracranial pressure is between 7 and 15 millimeters of mercury. A pressure above 20 is considered dangerous. Above 40 is a sign of severe, life-threatening injury. 65 was astronomical. It was a pressure completely incompatible with life. It meant the Admiral's brain was being crushed inside his own skull. "How?" Cross whispered, the sound barely audible. "How did we miss that?" "Because you were looking at the consequences, not the cause," Anya said without turning. "You saw a dead brain. So you stopped looking for why it died." She opened the stopcock on the bolt, allowing the CSF to drain freely into a sterile bag. "Get me 100 grams of mannitol and a liter of 3% hypertonic saline, wide open. We need to pull the water out of his brain tissue systemically." This time, there was no hesitation. The resident and another nurse scrambled to obey, their movements galvanized by the raw proof on the monitor. "And get the attending from radiology," Anya added. "I want a stat CT angiogram. I'm betting there's a slow bleed from a pseudoaneurysm on his basilar artery. The initial trauma caused it, and it's been leaking ever since. Too deep and too slow for the initial scans to catch without the right contrast timing." She was rewriting the entire diagnosis, overturning weeks of established medical consensus in a matter of minutes. As the high osmolarity fluids began to pour into the Admiral's veins, something on the EEG monitor caught her eye. "There," she said, pointing. Amidst the chaotic squiggles of electrical noise, a pattern was emerging. Slow, rhythmic waves, delta waves, the signature of a brain in deep sleep, not the flat line of death. "My God," the resident breathed, staring at the screen. "He's in there." The number on the intracranial pressure monitor began to drop. 65, 62, 58. With every point it fell, it felt as if a little more life was flowing back into the room. Anya watched the numbers descend, her posture finally relaxing by a fraction. The first phase of the battle was over. The immediate threat of herniation was receding. She had pulled him back from the absolute brink. Odin, who had been sitting quietly by the door, seemed to sense the shift. He stood up, walked over to the Admiral's bedside, and gently licked his master's limp hand. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the silence of grief and despair. It was the silence of awe. Dr. Marcus Cross stared at Anya, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions, shock, disbelief, humiliation, and, beneath it all, a dawning, profound respect. He had built his career on being the best, on meticulous planning, on protocol, on the unassailable authority of his expertise. This nurse, this woman he had dismissed and belittled, had just walked into his ICU, shattered his diagnosis, and saved his patient's life using a technique he would have condemned as reckless malpractice. She had done it with a confidence that bordered on supernatural. He cleared his throat. It was the sound loud in the quiet room. He walked over to Anya, stopping in front of her. The entire staff watched, expecting another explosion. Instead, Dr. Cross looked her directly in the eye. "I have been a surgeon for 25 years, he said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its earlier arrogance. I have never seen anything like that." He took a deep breath. "I was wrong," he said, "completely, inexcusably wrong. I was arrogant, and I was dismissive. You saved this man's life. I don't know who you are or where you learned to do that. But thank you." It was more than an apology. It was a surrender, a transfer of power. From that moment on, the professional conflict was over. An alliance forged in the crucible of a near-death crisis had begun. The ICU, which minutes before had been a place of quiet goodbyes, was now a hive of frantic, purposeful activity. Anya's orders had become gospel. The mannitol and hypertonic saline were infusing, drawing the crushing fluid from the Admiral's brain tissue. The bolt in his skull was steadily dripping CSF, a visible release of the pressure that had been strangling his mind. The number on the ICP monitor continued its slow, beautiful descent. 45, 41, 37. The radiology department had been mobilized. A portable CT scanner, a massive, cumbersome machine, was being wheeled carefully down the hallway. Dr. Cross, his ego seemingly shed like a snake's skin, was now her second in command. "The angio suite is being prepped," he reported to her, his tone now one of a colleague, not a superior. "Interventional radiology is on standby. If you're right about the pseudo-aneurysm, they can try to coil it. Good, Anya nodded, her eyes still scanning the monitors. But get the main OR ready too. Coiling might not be enough. If it's dissecting, we'll need to open him up. Full craniotomy. Cross just nodded. I'll make the call. He was no longer questioning her. He was facilitating her. The Admiral's wife, her face streaked with tears of a different kind now, tears of impossible hope, clutched Anya's arm. Will he be okay? He has a chance, Anya said, her voice gentle for the first time. That's more than he had 20 minutes ago. We have a long way to go. It was Colonel Thorne who finally asked the question that hung in the air, thick and heavy. He stepped forward, his gaze direct and penetrating. Odin stood beside him, a silent, furry testament to the mystery. That procedure, the bolt, you've done that before, he said. Yes, Anya replied simply. Where? Anya's professional mask settled back into place, but this time it was different. It wasn't a shield for anonymity. It was a barrier against a past that was clawing its way into the present. Kandahar Province, 2016, she said, her voice dropping. The words meant only for him. FOB Triton, your father was visiting for a strategic briefing. The mess tent took a direct mortar hit during dinner. The colonel's eyes widened in recognition. He had been stateside, but he knew the story. It was infamous, a catastrophic attack, 14 dead, dozens wounded. His father had been one of the most critical casualties, pulled from the wreckage with a severe head injury. The official report said he'd been stabilized by a forward surgical team before being evacuated to Landstuhl. You were there, he breathed. I was the surgeon, Anya confirmed. The FST was just me and 2 medics in a reinforced shipping container. Your father had a piece of shrapnel in his skull. The pressure was climbing. We didn't have an OR. We didn't have a neurosurgeon, so I did what I had to do. I drilled a burr hole with a sterilized bit from a toolkit and saved his life. The pieces clicked into place for the colonel. The dog. Odin had been there, part of the chaos, his original handler one of the casualties, the scent of the surgeon, the calm authority in the face of carnage, the unique pheromones of adrenaline and command. It had all been seared into the animal's memory, a memory that had just saved his master's life for a second time. They called you the Ghost, the colonel whispered, a name he'd heard in passing from other operators, a legendary, almost mythical trauma surgeon who worked with Tier 1 units, someone who could pull miracles out of thin air in the middle of a firefight, who had a reputation for impossible saves, a surgeon who one day had simply vanished. That was a long time ago, Anya said dismissively. Why are you a nurse in a civilian hospital? The colonel pressed, his voice a low rumble. Someone with your skills. You could be running the trauma department at Walter Reed. You could be writing your own ticket anywhere in the world. Anya's gaze became distant. The sterile hum of the ICU faded, replaced by another sound in her memory. The deafening silence after an explosion, the screams, the weight of too many bodies and not enough hands. I left the service, she said, her voice tight, after a mission went bad, a black site, Operation Scythe. The name dropped into the air like a stone. The colonel flinched as if struck. He knew that name. It was classified above top secret, a disaster. An entire special operations team, along with their support element, wiped out. The official story was a catastrophic equipment failure during a raid, but the rumors in the spec ops community were darker. Betrayal, a setup. I was the support element, Anya said, her voice hollow. I was the surgeon on call. I lost them, all of them, my team, my friends. The guilt was a physical thing, a shroud she had worn for 3 years. She had run from it, from the military, from surgery, and from the person she used to be. She had buried the ghost and become Nurse Sharma, hoping the quiet routine of a civilian hospital would exorcise the real ghosts that haunted her. I couldn't save them, she whispered, so I stopped trying to save anyone. Before the colonel could respond, a tech from the hospital's security division appeared at the door, looking flustered. Dr. Cross? Ma'am? He looked at Anya, unsure now of who was in charge. We have a problem. What is it? Cross asked. The fingerprint scanner on the automated medication dispenser, the tech said, holding up a tablet. The one she used to pull the emergency meds. He pointed at Anya. Her print just came back with a flag, a big one. It's linked to a federal database I've never even seen before, DHS. But higher. Anya felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. She had been careful. So careful. She had used a new identity, a clean social security number, but biometrics, you couldn't run from your own fingerprints. It triggered an automated alert, the tech continued, his voice trembling slightly as he read from the screen. Sent to something called the Office of Special Acuity. Colonel Thorne swore under his breath, a sharp, violent curse. He knew that name too. It was a phantom agency, a cutout used by the intelligence community for its darkest, most sensitive operations, the kind of people who cleaned up messes like Operation Scythe. The tech's eyes were wide with fear. It says they're on their way. Anya looked from the frightened tech to the colonel's grim face. The past wasn't just clawing its way back, it was kicking down the door. She had run from the ghosts of Operation Scythe for 3 years. Now they had a location. They knew where to find her. The calm efficiency of the ICU was shattered by a new kind of tension. It was no longer just a medical crisis, it was a tactical one. How long? Colonel Thorne demanded of the security tech. The alert was sent 10 minutes ago, the tech stammered. Their nearest field office is downtown, 20 minutes, maybe less. Not enough time. Anya's mind, honed by years of battlefield threat assessment, went into overdrive. The hospital was a civilian soft target, multiple entrances, no hardened perimeter. They would be here before she could even process the implications. Lock it down, Anya said, her voice sharp. Dr. Cross looked at her, confused. Lock what down? The ICU. The whole floor, the colonel clarified, already pulling out his phone. Code Silver, active threat, no one in or out without my authorization. He was already dialing a number from memory, a direct line to someone at the Pentagon. This is Colonel Thorne, he barked into the phone. I am declaring a military exigency situation at Metropolitan General Hospital. I have a 4-star asset under potential threat. Authorize a security perimeter, now. The hospital staff stared, bewildered, as the chain of command shifted once again, from medical to military. Anya turned to Cross. The CT angio, we need to do it now. If I'm going to fix what's in his head, I need to see it before they get here. Who is they? Cross asked, his voice strained. The people who don't want the Admiral to wake up, Anya said grimly. The implication was horrifying. The Admiral's accident might not have been an accident at all. And they know you're here, Cross realized, because of the fingerprint. Anya nodded. I was supposed to be a ghost. I just tripped a wire. Suddenly, the stakes were infinitely higher. This wasn't just about saving a man's life anymore. It was about protecting him from the people who may have tried to take it in the first place. And Anya was now directly in their crosshairs. The hospital's overhead speakers crackled to life. Code Silver, Intensive Care Unit. Code Silver, Intensive Care Unit. This is not a drill. Heavy magnetic locks on the ICU doors slammed shut with a deafening thud. Nurses and residents looked around in panic. Move, Anya yelled. Pushing the Admiral's bed, her and Cross on one side, the colonel and another nurse on the other. Odin trotted alongside, a low growl rumbling in his chest as he sensed the new threat. They half ran, half pushed the bed with its precarious tangle of IV poles and monitors down the now-cleared hallway toward the radiology suite. They got the Admiral transferred to the CT scanner table just as the first sign of the outside world's intrusion appeared. 2 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits and earpieces strode up to the locked ICU doors. They didn't knock. One of them produced a small electronic device and held it to the keypad. The magnetic lock clicked open. They stepped inside, their eyes sweeping the empty nurses' station. They moved with an unnerving, fluid grace that spoke of extensive training. They were not police. They were not FBI. They were something else. The senior of the two, a man with silver hair and eyes as cold as a winter sky, spoke into his wrist. Target is mobile. She's with the package. They've initiated a lockdown. In the CT control room, Anya watched the dye from the angiogram flood the Admiral's cerebral arteries on the monitor. The images rendered slice by slice, building a 3-dimensional map of the vessels in his brain. There, she breathed, pointing at the screen. At the base of the brain, where the two vertebral arteries joined to form the basilar artery, was a small, ugly bulge, a saccular pseudoaneurysm. It was tiny, barely a few millimeters across, but it was leaking. A slow, insidious bleed deep in the most inaccessible part of the brain. It was a ticking time bomb. And her unsanctioned burr hole was just a temporary fix. The pressure would build again. "We need to clip it," Cross said, his voice filled with a surgeon's focus. "Open him up, a suboccipital approach." "No time," Anya cut him off. "They're already on the floor. We try to move him to the OR. They'll intercept us. They will stop us." "Then what do we do?" Cross asked, desperation creeping into his voice. "We can't just leave it." Anya's eyes were fixed on the screen, her mind racing, processing angles, trajectories, possibilities. She was no longer just a surgeon. She was back in a combat zone, improvising with limited tools and a ticking clock. "We do it here," she said. Cross stared at her. "Here? In a radiology suite? Perform a craniotomy? That's insane. It's not sterile." "We don't have the right instruments." "Get me the bolt kit again," Anya ordered the terrified radiology tech, "and a biopsy needle, the longest one you have, and a microcatheter from the angio suite, and a roll of sterile gauze." "What are you going to do?" Cross asked, his voice a whisper of horrified awe. "If we can't get to the OR," Anya said, her eyes glinting with a dangerous, brilliant light, "I'll bring the OR to him." Outside, the colonel was in a tense standoff with the two men in suits. "I am Colonel Thomas Thorne, Jr. This area is under military authority. Identify yourselves." The silver-haired man smiled, a thin, predatory expression. "We don't have to." He gestured down the hall, where 4 more men, these ones dressed in tactical gear and carrying suppressed rifles, were advancing. "This hospital is now under the authority of the Office of Special Acuity," the man said smoothly. "We are here for 2 assets, the Admiral and his doctor." He looked past the colonel, his gaze locking on the control room door of the CT suite. "Her name is Anya Sharma," the man said, "though she has other names. And we have a standing order for her retrieval, alive if possible." The threat was clear. The colonel stood his ground, but he knew he was outgunned and outmaneuvered. The official channels he had tried to use were being bypassed by an authority that operated outside the law. Inside the control room, Anya worked with a terrifying speed. She had the images from the CT angio displayed on every screen, creating a 3D holographic model of the Admiral's brain that she could rotate and zoom in on with a flick of her wrist. She had found her approach, not a full craniotomy, something faster, more precise, more dangerous, a keyhole. She used the hand drill again, this time at the nape of the Admiral's neck, just below the occipital bone. A retro-auricular approach. She was aiming for a tiny window between the cerebellum and the brainstem. Cross watched, assisting her now, handing her instruments, his earlier shock replaced by a laser-like focus. He was witnessing a level of neurosurgical improvisation that bordered on science fiction. "This is impossible," he murmured, as she fed a long, thin endoscope through the burr hole. "Hold this," she commanded, giving him the end of the scope. She picked up the long biopsy needle. On the screen, they could see the feed from the endoscope, a grainy, surreal journey through the landscape of a living brain. She navigated past the delicate lobes of the cerebellum, following the path she had mapped out in her mind. Then she saw it. The basilar artery pulsing with the rhythm of the Admiral's heart, and on it the ugly weeping bulge of the pseudoaneurysm. "Okay," she breathed, "I'm going in." She fed the biopsy needle alongside the endoscope. On the screen, they saw the glint of its metal tip approach the aneurysm. Her hands had to be perfect. A millimeter too far, and she would puncture the artery, causing a fatal hemorrhage. A millimeter too short, and she would miss. The door to the control room burst open. The silver-haired man stood there, flanked by 2 of his tactical operators, their weapons raised. "Dr. Sharma," the man said, his voice calm, "step away from the patient. You're coming with us." Anya did not even look up. Her eyes were glued to the screen. Her hands were rock steady. "If you take one more step," she said, her voice dangerously low, "his blood will be on your hands, literally." The man, who introduced himself as Director Vance, hesitated. He could see the live feed on the monitors. He understood, on a tactical level, the knife edge she was on. "We have a mission," Vance said, "and you are a part of it." "My mission is right here," Anya countered, her fingers making a microscopic adjustment. The tip of the needle was now touching the aneurysm. Colonel Thorne and Cross stood between her and Vance's men, a fragile human shield. "This man is a 4-star Admiral of the United States Navy," the colonel said, his voice shaking with rage. "You will not interfere with his medical treatment." Vance smiled that cold, dead smile again. The Admiral became our business the moment he started investigating Operation Scythe. He got too close to a sensitive truth. His accident was supposed to solve that problem. His continued survival is a complication. It was a confession, a cold-blooded admission in the middle of a hospital. "Operation Scythe wasn't a failure, was it?" Anya asked, her eyes never leaving the monitor. "It was a purge." "Your team was compromised," Vance said smoothly. "They were a liability, so we cauterized the wound. You, however, you were listed as an asset to be recovered. Your skills are too valuable to be left to chance or to a quiet life as a nurse." The truth hit Anya with the force of a physical blow. The guilt she had carried for 3 years, the weight of her failure to save her team, was a lie. They had been murdered, and she had been their intended surgeon, left alive only because of her utility. Her grief for a second threatened to overwhelm her. Then it forged itself into something else, ice-cold rage. "You're not recovering an asset," Anya said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You're witnessing a resurrection." With a final decisive movement, she advanced the needle. She punctured the aneurysm. But she didn't stop there. With an impossible dexterity, she threaded a microcoil, scavenged from the interventional radiology suite, through the hollow needle and into the ruptured sac. It was a technique that should not be possible. A hybrid of open surgery and endovascular coiling performed through a keyhole in the back of a man's skull in a CT scanner. On the screen, they saw the tiny platinum coil deploy, filling the aneurysm. The bleeding stopped. Instantly. She had done it. She had defused the bomb. In that moment of shared, stunned silence, Anya looked up, meeting Director Vance's cold eyes. "The Admiral will live," she said, "and when he wakes up, he's going to talk. I recorded your entire confession. It's been live-streaming to a secure server under the authority of Colonel Thorne. Your complication just became a witness, and so did I." Vance's face, for the first time, showed a flicker of something other than smug control. He had underestimated her. He had seen a valuable tool. He had failed to see the weapon she had become. The standoff was broken not by a gunshot, but by the arrival of a new force. A team of uniformed military police, armed and moving with disciplined purpose, flooded the hallway. They surrounded Vance and his men. Colonel Thorne lowered his phone. "Director Vance," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction, "you are being detained on suspicion of conspiracy and attempted murder of a flag officer. It seems my authority is a little more current than yours." Vance did not resist. He simply stared at Anya, a look of cold, calculating appraisal in his eyes. This was not over. It was just a new phase of the game. As his men were disarmed and led away, he looked back at Anya one last time. "A resurrection, you said?" Vance called out, his voice echoing in the now quiet hall. "Be careful, Doctor. Sometimes the things that come back are monsters." He was gone. The immediate threat had passed. Anya finally allowed herself to feel the crushing weight of exhaustion. Her hands began to shake, the adrenaline deserting her. She leaned against the control panel, her legs suddenly weak. Dr. Cross put a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Anya," he said, using her first name for the first time. That was a miracle." "It was just medicine," she whispered, though she knew it was more than that. It was vengeance. It was justice for her fallen team. Colonel Thorne approached her, his face a mask of gratitude and awe. "You saved him, twice. I don't know how to thank you." "Help him wake up," Anya said. "Help him tell his story." In the days that followed, Metropolitan General Hospital became the epicenter of a quiet, seismic political earthquake. Men in dark suits came and went. Non-disclosure agreements were signed. The official story was that Admiral Thorne had suffered complications from his fall and required a novel, a high-risk procedure that had been miraculously successful. Operation Scythe, Director Vance, and the Office of Special Acuity were never mentioned. They were swept back under the rug of national security. But the truth was out, in the right hands. A week later, Anya stood by the Admiral's bedside. He was awake, weak, his voice a hoarse whisper, but his eyes were clear and sharp. The commanding presence was returning. Odin lay on the floor, his head resting on his master's bed. The Admiral looked at Anya. "The ghost," he rasped. "I remember you from Kandahar, you and the dog." "We remember you too, Admiral," Anya said softly. His recovery would be long, but he would make it. He would testify. The men who sacrificed her team would be held accountable, even if it was only in the secret courts of the intelligence world. So her past was no longer a source of guilt. It was a source of strength. She had not failed her team. She had avenged them. The next day, Anya was called to the hospital administrator's office. She expected to be fired, or perhaps reprimanded in some formal way for the 100 protocols she had shattered. Instead, she found Dr. Cross and Colonel Thorne waiting for her. "Your nursing contract has been terminated," the administrator said formally. Anya nodded. She had expected it. "Because," Dr. Cross cut in, a wide, genuine smile on his face, "we've drawn up a new one." He slid a thick folder across the table. On the cover it read, "Director, Center for Advanced Trauma and Special Pathologies." "The Thorne family has made a very generous endowment," the colonel explained. "They want to create a new kind of unit. One that deals with the cases that fall through the cracks, the impossible diagnoses, the medical mysteries that require a different way of thinking. A place for a surgeon who can perform a craniotomy in a CT scanner," Cross added, his voice full of admiration. "A place that doesn't live by the book, but writes a new one when necessary. It needs a leader. It needs you." Anya stared at the folder. It was everything she had run from, a position of authority, a role that demanded she be the surgeon she once was. The ghost brought back into the light. She looked at Cross, her former antagonist, now her most ardent supporter. She looked at the colonel, the embodiment of the world she had left behind. She could say no. She could disappear again, find another quiet hospital, another anonymous life. But she was tired of running, and she was tired of being a ghost. "On one condition," Anya said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Anything," Cross said. "My department gets its own chief of morale," she said. "He's a Belgian Malinois. He works for belly rubs and steak." The final scene is not one of drama, but of quiet purpose. 3 months later. I stand in the observation dome above the newly opened center. It doesn't look like a part of the hospital. It's more like a mission control room. Glass walls, holographic displays, a team of hand-picked doctors and specialists, mavericks, thinkers, people who, like me, didn't always fit into the rigid structure of conventional medicine. Dr. Cross is down there, leading a diagnostic team, a newfound energy in his step. Below, in a state-of-the-art surgical suite, my team is performing a complex procedure on a patient flown in from halfway across the world, a case every other hospital had given up on. I am not scrubbed in. My role has changed. I lead, I teach, I see the whole board. A wet nose nudges my hand. Odin sits beside me, his official hospital ID hanging from his collar. He looks down at the activity below, then up at me, his eyes content. He knows he is home. We both are. For 3 years, I believed my skills were a curse, a reminder of the lives I couldn't save. I tried to bury that part of myself, to silence the ghost of the surgeon I had been. But the past doesn't stay buried. It follows you. And on a day that began like any other, it found me, led by a loyal dog who remembered not the failure, but the fight. Vance called it a resurrection. He was right. But he was wrong about the monster. What came back wasn't a monster. It was a healer, finally free from her own ghosts. I am no longer hiding in the shadows. I have a new team, a new mission. My name is Dr. Anya Sharma, and I am finally whole.